Drop it on them random.
What up, y'all? Welcome to another episode of That Time in Hip Hop, a podcast about the history and the nostalgia, but more importantly, the preservation of hip hop music and culture. I am your host, Vegas, of Hip Hop Now Podcast. I have with me, as always, the homie Tony of IntoTheDome.com. Tone, what's good, man?
Hey, man, look, organic juice, green.
Oh,
so
man.
I'm juicing. I purchased a juicer a few nights ago, and I'm feeling good, man. It's like my fourth night with no food, juicing every day, 6 drinks a day, man. I'm feeling good, man.
Man, I mean, I need to be like you, man. I've been slacking, man. My weight been going up and down, man. I've been slacking. As you can see, I'm slacking right now. It's probably 1,000 grams of sugar.
And that's a rock.
It's a rock, but I'll just work it off in the gym. If you are watching this video for the very first time or listening for the very first time, please know that it is available on YouTube. All you got to do is search for That Time in Hip Hop on the B-Roll Network. Also, if you search for Hip Hop Now Podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts, this podcast is also available there. But please know, this is what we do. This is, like a way of life for us, you know what I'm saying? But we enjoy bringing you this kind of content. And we hope that you hit that subscribe button. You hit that like button if you like it. You leave a comment. But most importantly, share it with people enjoy this kind of content. Now, if I could just get my iPad off the damn ground, we like to do this thing called This Week in Hip Hop. And in This Week in Hip Hop on May 13th, 1991, De La Soul dropped their sophomore album, De La Soul is Dead. For a long time, seemed like for De La fans, that was their best album. Tone, 1991. De La Soul comes out with a second album, and they're talking about the Daisy Age is dead. What was your thoughts? What you think about the album?
Well, first, when you come after a classic like, 3 Feet High and Rising, it's like any artist in any genre. If your debut is a classic, that second album will be heavily critiqued, and you're trying to match it with the first one. So De La Soul kind of went a different route. I mean, it's kind of, to me, a concept album. They're kind of dissing themselves to a degree, but they're also dissing like the mainstream. They're also dissing like hippie hip hop, you know what I'm saying? And kind of the way they came in the game kind of is like the hip hop hippies a little bit on Me, Myself, and I. And you look at some of the videos and images of 3 Feet High and Rising. So it was kind of starting anew to a degree, but it also was kind of a rage against the machine as well. So it was very creative, a lot of skits in there, kind of, I don't want to say like a movie, but it was kind of like the first Cuban Links in terms of characters in the skits and stuff like that. And they also, Pasta News had a line I had written down about, it was on a song called Pass the Plugs. And he said something like Arsenio distance, but the crowd kept clapping. And it was because at one point they did a show on the Arsenio Hall show, and Arsenio introduced them as the hip hop hippies. You know what I'm saying? And they wasn't feeling that shit. You know what I'm saying? They didn't like that, so they kind of put that, intertwined that within the concept of De La Soul is Dead. Like, man, people kind of sleep on us and dissing us. So it's kind of like, you know what, we're that's dead. De La Soul is dead. You know what I'm saying? Like the album cover showing like the dead flower. You know what I'm saying? Like everything before this is just dead, and the mainstream is dead to us as well. So real creative, man. I love the album. It's one of the first albums to get 5 mics in the Source magazine. Just a few songs, man, that Saturday, you know what I'm saying? Roller skating was always fun. You know what I'm saying? With the tribe with it. The video was real fun, just typical native tongues at that time. Ring, Ring, Ring was another single that, hey, how you doing? And that's also about demos and the record industry and stuff like that as well, man. So they kind of kept some of the concept going. And, I remember a friend of mine used to always play this track, Oodles and O's, you know what I'm saying? So it was some dope tracks on there. Prince Paul did the production again like he did on 3 Feet High and Rising. I mean, what can you say, man? If you was a De La Soul fan, it probably took you back a minute, but once you digest the album, I mean, it was a pretty much a brilliant album, and it aged well too. If you go back and listen to it now, it sounds really good, man. But I thought it was dope when I first heard it personally. I enjoyed the singles. The beats were dope to me. And really, Pastor News and Trugo, they always dope on the mic, man. Kind of slept on, man. But I enjoyed the album. Not sure if it was five mics to me. I don't know. It's hard when I think of five mics because 3 Feet High and Rising to me, Edge it maybe some, and Stakes is High is my favorite De La Soul album. But I get it for the time in like 1991. I can see if someone call it a classic. I'm not mad at it. What was your thoughts when you first heard it?
Well, it took me a minute to hear it, man. Like in 1991, man, I was a huge hip hop fan and a broke hip hop fan. And my brother was a DJ, and it was really like if he got the record, as a DJ, that's when I could get a copy. Like I literally had to rely on the DJs wanting to get the whole album in order to get a copy myself. And I remember, the Five Mics in the Source. I remember the whole, De La Soul's Dead campaign and how people were high on the album. And I had 3 Feet High and Rising, played it to death, and I was so thirsty for that album, for the De La Soul's Dead album. And like once I got it, I didn't feel like it was Five Mics. I think it was shocking to me because, like you said, they kind of, I guess, turned their backs on the image that was somewhat created with their first album, with the whole, Daisy Age thing, and people viewing them as like a version of hip hop hippies, which they weren't, But I get it, like the album cover, the videos, and all that. It kind of came across that way. So for them to kind of shun that, I didn't really know how to take them because, it was just kind of like, well, but why? Why is De La Soul's dead? And what's the metaphor? But overall, like you said, man, Ring Ring I love that joint. I love Saturdays to death. It was a very dope album for the time. I probably give it 4 mics. And I feel like in some ways I understood what De La Soul was doing by trying to like dump that image before that became who they were. But I also think like it was almost too late, because even though there are a lot of people who are De La fans, I think there were just more of them when 3 Feet High and Rising came out. And I think once they tried to, I don't want to say take a harder edge, because it's not like their lyrical content changed. Us hip hop fans recognize that. But I think they alienated some people who were into them. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes you can't just cold turkey it. Sometimes you got to wean. It's like a dog. You got to wean them off of it. You know what I'm saying? Slowly. You can't just be like, oh, that's dead. Because, it happened to Boot Camp. Boot Camp Click had a sound, and they wanted to prove to people that they can rap to a different sound, and most people stopped feeling them after that. It's sad, but it's the nature of the beast, man, of marketing and promotions and all those types of things. And, sometimes most of us can look past that, and some people can't, man. They just think it's over and they just move on, man. Before we get into the topic at hand and the theme, which you can see what's going on in the background, if you know that movie, you know your history. We want to say a quick rest in peace to director of this movie here, Boys in the Hood, John Singleton, who passed recently. A pioneer in film and black film. In general, a powerful movie that depicted the hood, that any hood in really anywhere could relate to the themes that were going on in this movie and the struggle, and how there isn't always a happy ending for these types of movies. Yeah. Because it reflected life, you know what I'm saying? Powerful actors, as you can see, Lawrence Fishburne, Angela Bassett, Cuba Gooding Jr. did his thing in there. Ice Cube this was his first time appearing in a movie as an actor. This was back when he was full-time rapper, kids. So when you watch this ain't Are We There Yet? This is NWA, America's Most Wanted. Yeah,
Yep.
it's Jerry Curl Ice Cube. It wasn't for the movies. That was his hair. So, but definitely, man, John Singleton, man, should never be forgotten, man. Just a pioneer, inspiration to a lot of people from a lot of backgrounds, and really the main reason why I definitely want to give him a shout out on this here podcast is because, man, he made it so that rappers could be taken seriously as actors.
Yeah.
He really, you know how like you got Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio team, and Scorsese and Robert De Niro, and you got all these teams of director and actor, and he always saw certain rappers in these roles. You know what I'm saying? If you don't know, Tupac was supposed to be Tyrese's character in Baby Boy. You know what I'm saying? So he always created a movie and looked at rappers as, oh, I'm gonna put Busta Rhymes in that seat. You know what I'm saying? I'm gonna put Ice Cube in this. So it's just a testament to who he was, how big of a hip hop fan he was, and how he was about the culture. You know what I'm saying? But Tone, you could say a couple of words if you want.
I definitely want to, because obviously for me personally, this one sits close to home because John Singleton is a part of my fraternity, Kappa Alpha Psi. I personally I didn't get a chance to meet him, but I have friends that did meet him, and they did like him a lot. He represented our fraternity. There's a lot of interviews you can see him throw up our symbol, our yo. You know what I'm saying? So really, rest in peace to the Newt, John Singleton, who loved this culture. He loved hip hop, like Big said. He put Ice Cube in Boys in the Hood, and this was pretty much America's Most Wanted death certificate, Ice Cube. You know what I mean? This was still Ice Cube making bangers, street bangers, and he also turned around a few years later and helped inspire him to get Friday written, of course. And Ice Cube did Friday, and also John Singleton also put him in Higher Learning, which was a great movie as well. And he's on the soundtrack to both of these movies also. So John Singleton loved hip hop. He had a relationship with Tupac. That's not a secret. They did Poetic Justice, and stuff like that. So I mean, there's a lot of history with John Singleton, man. So rest in peace to the Newt, man. Real talk.
No doubt, man. And now we get to the point in the show where we talk about whatever it is that happened in hip hop, and this period in hip hop, or this decade, was really magical when we look back on it. We loved it when it was happening. You know what I'm saying? We took advantage of it, from the soundtracks to the films themselves. But Tone, tell the people what we're here to talk about, man.
So Vague, man, today we're going to talk about hip hop movies and soundtracks, and how the soundtracks pretty much took a life of its own. And a lot of the artists, man, they release classic material, but when we think about the 80s, for example, the movies and the soundtrack was more about the culture. And then when the 90s came, it was like directors started to kind of take MCs and people in hip hop and look at them as actors. And so the movies became a big deal. But at the same time, as hip hop enthusiasts and hip hop fans, we rushed to the store. Kids who are listening right now, there was no internet like it is now. So we actually had to go to the record store and get the soundtrack to these movies. And we were very excited to hear the soundtracks to these movies, and especially if one of the artists on the soundtrack was an artist who actually got a chance to play in a movie. And if they had a big role in the movie, it was even more exciting, because it was like you're getting the best of both worlds. Like if you watch Boys in the Hood, like you see in the background in Babe's TV screen, Ice Cube was one of the stars of Boys in the Hood. But when you get the soundtrack, you hear How to Survive in South Central. And that was kind of like the song of the soundtrack. Like, for example, most hip hop movies that had a soundtrack had a song or two on that soundtrack that was kind of the face of that soundtrack and the face of that movie. You know what I mean? So that was always a big deal in the 90s, to run to the store and get the soundtrack and then kind of meshed up the movie and see, hey, did I like the movie better than the soundtrack? Did I like the soundtrack better than the movie? Were both of them dope? And every now and then we'll get lucky. Like for example, with Juice, it's like, okay, the movie was dope. Everyone loves Juice. Tupac did this great job being Bishop, but the supporting cast was dope. But that soundtrack, though, when you had, Big Daddy Kane, Enough Respect Dude, you know what I'm saying? Then you had Eric B. and Rakim, Know the Ledge. And it's like those were some of the songs that made you rush to the store to get that, or either get your man's tape and then make you a copy of that tape. You know what I'm saying? So those are some of the stuff, man, that made me think about how important it was, babe, to get, the soundtrack, man. You know what I'm saying? That matched the movie, man. But for you, how did you look at soundtracks in the 90s? Because the 90s was a glorious decade for so many hip-hop movies and so many hip-hop documentaries. And it always was a lot of dope music that went along with it, man. And I think that it's missing today because the movies and soundtracks come out today, the movies and documentaries rather come out today. It's the focus is on the big screen. The focus is not really on the soundtrack. Like for us, the focus was like almost equal. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I agree, man. I was going to say the same thing. It always felt like when you went to the movies to see one of these movies like Boys in the Hood or whatever, or Juice or whatever it was, you was there for the movie. But the soundtrack just fit so well with the movie that you immediately wanted it. Because, you think of the record you heard during this scene and you like, damn, that scene was dope. So you go home, you go to the record store, you buy the album or buy the soundtrack. And then, after you've seen the movie, you listening to these records and now the scenes from the movies are playing over in your mind. You know what I'm saying? And it kind of enhances the record just as much as it enhanced the scene. And it was dope because you had a time that was similar to this in the 70s with the blaxploitation movies, and you had like Willie Hutch and James Brown and Curtis Mayfield and Aretha Franklin, all these dope black 70s movies that had these awesome soundtracks. And it didn't really happen again, like Tone said, when it came to the 80s, and especially with hip hop. It was more the movies were about hip hop. So of course you're listening for the music, but these were movies that were telling stories, and the soundtracks just went well with every scene that was there. I think for me, a lot of times, man, it was just that. It was the fact that you remember how much you liked the movie and the scenes, and you talking about it with your friends and stuff like that. And then you remember all of the music that you heard in the records or whatever. And like, it's no secret, man. Ice Cube, I was a huge fan at this point in time. Huge fan. So I'm already there because Ice Cube is in it and he's playing a gangster and he's a gangster rapper. And I think what really got me hyped more than seeing like the trailer for this movie was the fact that I heard How to Survive in South Central before I saw the movie. And when I heard that record, I was like, yo, like I gotta see this movie, man. This is about to be crazy. Y'all want to see a dead body? Like,
yeah, no doubt.
It's about to be crazy, man. But yeah, like you said, Tone, it's different when you look at movie soundtracks today. Now, I think it happens every now and again, and probably more so recently, like with the Black Panther soundtrack, because that was the first time in a long time when Black Panther goes off and All the Stars is playing. I love that record, but I think it had a lot to do with how much I love the Black Panther movie. And it just went well with the ending of that movie because that song sound the way I felt by the end of the movie. You know what I'm saying?
And you know what? Yeah, you know what too? Back in the 90s, the soundtrack was like the novel to the movie. You know what I mean? What I mean by that is like, think about Menace to Society. So when you think of Spice One song, A Trigger Got No Heart, the story he's telling within that song is several scenes in the movie to a degree. Same way when you hear MCH straight up menace, he's actually telling you the perspective of Kane in the movie.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The song. And then if you look at the end of the last verse and the last couple of words of that bar at the end of the song, he said the trigger, well, not the trigger has no heart, but he was talking about when the guys came back to get Kane at the end. He's rapping with that without saying Kane's name.
Yeah.
So MC8 was telling the story, and then Spice One was telling the story, and then there's a Too Short song on there as well that kind of complements those songs. And then Too Short had a scene or two in the movie. Of course, MC8 was AWACS, and he had a pretty substantial scene. Part in the movie and stuff like that. So, again, that gave you a chance to appreciate, let's say, MC8 as an actor and as an MC. Same for Too Short. And then again, you get a hard song like Spice One's that the video was playing on BET. You know what I mean? The Triple Got No Heart. So it was just dope the way it was all combined in like one big project. Boys in the Hood, we love the movie, but we love Ice Cube, but we got a chance to hear, like you said, How to Survive in South Central. Even though Boys in the Hood soundtrack, believe it or not, is not like a gangster soundtrack. Menace Society soundtrack is a gangster soundtrack. You got like Pocket Full of Stones type stuff on there. You know what I'm saying? But you don't have that on. Boys in the Hood. Boys in the Hood has some R&B on there also.
Yeah.
Kind of like the way we think about like a few years before that when New Jack City came out, had New Jack Hustle on there with Ice-T. But after that, you had a bunch of R&B joints. Had like Christopher Williams on there. You know what I'm saying? So it was kind of a little off balance. You know what I'm saying? I think Menace it went with the movie. And again, New Jack City did have parts where, Keith Sweat singed on the movie when he did that part for the wedding. So, he's on the soundtrack. So that did make sense. But New Jack was a gangster movie. So you kind of expected a gangster soundtrack. You didn't really get that. You kind of got like, R&B soundtrack with a couple of joints on there. But Menace, you got a full hardcore soundtrack that went with the same with Juice. Juice had it was hard. You know what I'm saying? Like you had some hard joints throughout the soundtrack.
Yeah.
So we got that on those, man. Matter of fact, just real quick, baby, what do you think about the ones we've mentioned so far? Because we got so much more to talk about in this episode. But what do you think about the Boys in the Hood soundtrack, Menace Society soundtrack, and the Juice soundtrack? Do you prefer one over the other in that, whatever?
I probably prefer if I had to put them in order of what I like or what I would play, I would say probably Juice, then Menace, and then Boys in the Hood. Obviously, for what you mentioned, Boys in the Hood had it's spotty, and it's funny because I was telling somebody we were going to do this topic, and I told them, I was like, you know what? When you look at these albums, these soundtracks, and the movies they're associated with, you got some good ass movies with some okay soundtracks. You got a couple of cases where the movie is dope and the soundtrack is dope, and then you have some cases where the soundtrack is banging and the movie's trash. You know what I'm saying? And I think with the soundtracks, it was always like a hit or miss thing. Like I don't think there's a soundtrack. And we might bring it up. I mean, I own some of these soundtracks, but I don't think there was one where I felt like I listened to the entire thing. You know what I'm saying? Without skipping one record.
So a quick thought then.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about movie soundtracks and hip hop documentary soundtracks. So just let me say, when I think about not skipping a track on there, and again, we can go in detail later. The documentary The Soul in the Hole, you know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah.
That soundtrack is one of the best hip hop soundtracks I've ever heard. And it's just oddly and unfortunate that it's slept on. You know what I'm saying? Like a lot of people haven't heard the soundtrack. Now, documentary is about a basketball joint. It's a basketball documentary. It's real. It's a real joint. But the soundtrack introduced me to Big Pun. The first time I personally heard Big Pun was on a track called "You're Not a Killer" on Soul in the Hole soundtrack. They end up a year later putting that on Capital Punishment. That was my introduction to Dead Prez. They had The first song on the soundtrack was a joint called Game of Life. Some of the best lyrics. It's a thought-provoking joint. It feels like some brand Nubian early KRS-One. I mean, it's an amazing track. You had Wu-Tang had a track on there. You know, said OC has a track on there. Organized Confusion. Common Sense had a joint on there called Great Expectations, which is one of my favorite Common songs, man. It sounds like something from the. It's funny that Common's Great Expectations actually, since it came out like '97, I believe, so on the whole, that's during the time of One Day It Will All Make Sense, and that song sounded like it would fit perfect on that album. Just so many dope joints. Organized Confusion. I don't know if I said that, man. You know, it's just a dope album, man, and I mean soundtrack rather, and the documentary was dope too. But that's one thing when I think about something I can ride to all the way through. I didn't hear, you know, to be honest with you, man, I don't think it's a weak song on there, man. I mean, so that's what I definitely recommend for people to check out.
Yeah, one soundtrack to me that was better than the movie, in my opinion, was Sunset Park. It was a lot of hip hop, man. It was like Tupac was on there, Ghostface, Mobb Deep, of course, Back at You. There was some R&B.
Oh man, that's one of my favorite Mobb Deep songs. Back at You is also
Back at You,
one of my favorite. Yeah, Back at You is one of my favorite Mobb Deep songs and videos in black and white, man. Rest in peace, Prodigy was just so dope on there. The way they stick in the back of the car, man, just the way it was vibing off each other.
The beat was crazy. Yeah, and it was, man. I remember when I first saw that video, and I was like, "What movie is this?" Like, you know what I'm saying? Because I was just like, "This song is crazy." But yeah, man, I think probably the because I said I like the Juice soundtrack. Obviously, it is like you mentioned, Eric B. and Rakim's on there, Big Daddy Kane, Naughty by Nature with Uptown Anthem.
Oh man, classic.
But I think probably the Above the Rim soundtrack is probably one where I don't skip as much. I was like shocked by that soundtrack. Like I didn't realize it was going to be that dope. Like, you know what I'm saying? Because I knew I had.
Was that your East Coast bias, Vague? Was that your Brooklyn, New York, East Coast bias?
No, it was an East Coast bias movie. Like that's the dope part about it. It takes place in New York, and Death Row does the soundtrack. Like
that is odd, right?
You know what I'm saying? You don't get no better than that. And like the Dog Pound got some dope joints. Obviously, Tupac got some dope joints. Regulate is on there. Like it almost doesn't match the movie in some respects because it's really has a real funk chill vibe that feels more like the West Coast than when you watch the movie where, you know, it's like playing basketball at the Rucker and all that. It's a real New York movie.
Yeah, the music don't always match, man, with Above the Rim and the soundtrack. That's funny you said that, but also at the end of Above the Rim, when Dwayne Martin ended up playing for Georgetown and he hit that buzzer beat and his mom and all them and Leon and is in the bar and they kind of celebrating, you know, Warren G. Regulator come on with the movie going off. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
and that's the last visual of the movie. You know what I'm saying? And of course, Warren G had blown up with Regulators, his album, and on the show soundtrack, the show documentaries on that. So it was Warren G's moment also, and that was kind of the face of the movie, the song of the movie, Regulate. Even though Tupac had probably most people consider Pain one of Tupac's top 5 songs. It's probably my favorite Tupac song. But it also talked about kind of like the movie. It kind of explained the movie to a degree. Pain did, and he also had that joint with Trench called True to the Game.
Yeah.
And of course, I cannot forget on Above the Rim soundtrack anything with SWV and Wu-Tang. That joint was in the clubs, the streets, and everything, man. Also, I'd be remiss if I didn't say there's a song on there called Blown Away. I think it was produced by DJ Quick, man. I can't remember the guy's name on top of my head right now, but there was a dope song called
B Rizal.
B Rizal, that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. B Rizal, Blown Away. I love that track, man. But yeah, like you said, man, Above the Rim soundtrack was dope. And just real quick, talking soundtracks and Tupac. Tupac was one of those guys who dominated hip hop soundtracks in the '90s because he had that "High Till I Die" on Sunset Park. He had several songs on Above the Rim. He was on like Poetic Justice.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? He was on the Juice Joint, I believe. Does he have a track on Juice Joint?
I think he did.
I'm not sure he have a track on that.
Can't remember.
But he had so many different tracks. But Ice Cube, Too Short, and Pac, they were on various soundtracks, man. You know what I'm saying? So they kind of took advantage of the soundtrack wave in the '90s. And also Tupac was on the show soundtrack, My Block, which is one of my favorite Tupac songs, man. And real quick, the reason why that song was interesting to me, because I remember getting the show soundtrack, was also one of my top 5 favorite hip hop soundtracks. My Block had 4 verses on it. Most songs, of course, especially in hip hop, has 3 verses. Well, My Block has 4 verses, kind of like MC8 did 4 verses on a song called Represent on 1997 Rhyme and Reason soundtrack off the Rhyme and Reason documentary. And both of those songs still stick with me because I remember hearing them and I'm thinking something about to go off. And on both of those songs, both MCs started rapping again. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And both of those songs have 4 verses on them. And speaking of Rhyme and Reason, you remember that documentary and that soundtrack?
Yeah, it's vaguely, because I think at the time there was a lot going on. Like, I was in school, there was a lot going on, so I was kind of falling off a little bit with my hip hop music as far as like things that weren't like major releases or whatever. But I remember it being dope. I remember plenty of cats like playing it to death. You know what I'm saying, on campus and stuff like that. Did Guru have a song on there? Guru had a song. I think he did.
Tribe did. KRS-One, E40, a bunch of people, man. So anyone listening, check out that Rhyme and Reason soundtrack. Check out that Rhyme and Reason documentary. If you love hip hop, that joint is very in depth about hip hop, and they talk to a lot of MCs. They show this very dope freestyle with Exhibit, man. Like, Exhibit is a very dope MC. Younger cats might think about him Pimp My Ride or something like that, but Exhibit was a very raw MC, man, and he does a joint on there. So yeah, check that out. Far Side on there, man. A lot of people on that documentary, man. So definitely check that out.
So, all right. So this is another thing about those soundtracks around that time that they did, and I'm going to name 2 movies. Obviously, Tone will probably get it off the rip as soon as I say what the movies are. But for some people who's not aware of some of the lesser known movies from the 90s that had soundtracks, what some of these soundtracks also did was introduce you to new talent that will go on to be legends in the game. Those 2 movies being Strictly Business, starring like Tommy Davidson or whatever, and another movie called Zebrahead, which had I believe was directed or starring Michael Rappaport. And on
that's right,
Strictly Business soundtrack, you had the first single from the queen of hip hop soul, Miss Mary J. Blige, will remind me. And on the Zebrahead soundtrack, you had the first ever record from Nasty Nas in Halftime. Now, perfect example of movies that most people don't own for the most part, or kind of forget about. I don't even.
They're not really good. They're not really good movies.
Yeah, they're not really good movies at the end of the day, but had gems on the soundtracks, and in this case, had 2 artists who, we say Mary J. Blige or Nas now. It's a whole legendary history that comes with that. But at the time, this is where they were introduced to audiences, and that was another vehicle. Also, it wasn't just to bolster artists. An artist who appeared in a movie, or an artist who was big, and this is a big movie and they wanted to be a part of it. It also was a showcase for a record label to say, hey, here's our new artist. You know what I'm saying? Here's a song on that soundtrack. So Tone, first time you said the movies were whack, but you know, the first time you heard an artist like a Nasty Nas or a dope record in general on a movie soundtrack to a movie that was completely trash, but yet you felt like I might have to, or I did go and get that particular soundtrack. And I'm thinking also of movies like Who's the Man, which also featured a ton of hip hop, but the movie was complete garbage.
Yeah, it's funny you said Who's the Man, because that's one I was about to say. I didn't like the movie, but there was this guy named Biggie Smalls had a song called Pardon Bullshit. You know what I'm saying? So,
Exactly.
you know, and that's when I heard that song. I didn't know who Biggie Smalls was. I'm in North Carolina. You know, we heard Pardon Bullshit. I'm like, yo, I don't love the beat, but that dude's voice is dope. You know what I'm saying? And he was like, can't we just all get along so I can put his chest a little Sean or something? I was like, okay, Don Perignon on this on. I'm like, that dude can rap though. You know what I'm saying? Like Biggie Smalls. You know what I'm saying? Then I heard that Dollar My Baby and all that. Then of course the rest is history. You hear Juice and you just know a legend is born, man. You know, so it's one of them things like that. I was introduced to Biggie because of that. Zebrahead, I did hear the Zebrahead soundtrack, and I did hear Halftime. I didn't really know who Nasty Nas was. I think during that same time I had heard Live from the Barbecue and Back to the Grill Again, but I didn't know who he was. You know, he wasn't popping down here in the South like that. But when I heard Halftime, I was like, you know, it's like Michael Mesh catching the jungle fever. And I never forget that line. I was like, oh, this dude nasty, you know, and hence Nasty Nas. So I remember that. And of course, the other joint with Mary J, man. But also, I need to say this as well. Another sleeper, and I'm gonna deviate off just real quick. Another sleeper that a lot of people might not know about is I have tapes, people. I still have tapes. This is In Too Deep.
Yeah. Yep.
In Too Deep came out in '99. And this features I guess I didn't deviate too much because there's a guy out here that has a song called Rowdy Rowdy and How to Rob. And that dude's name is Curtis Jackson, aka 50 Cent. Yeah. So a lot of people first heard 50 Cent on In Too Deep soundtrack. You know what I'm saying? And speaking of just the dopeness of this.
And hold on, what record label was that? Is that Sony Columbia?
This is Sony Music soundtrack. Yeah.
See?
So it makes sense, man. So this is the music inspired from the motion picture. In Too Deep title track, Nas and Nature. You know what I'm saying? You had Tear It Off with Method Man and Redman. There's a guy out here, hip-hop heads gonna know this name, but for the casual fans, you might not know. There's a young guy from Queens named Ali Vegas, had a track on here called The Specialist. So go to YouTube and put The Specialist in, Ali Vegas. They thought he was gonna be the next Nas. He was kind of a little pretty boy from Queens. He had that dope flow. He kind of had that Nas flow. And there's been some rumors now. Ali Vegas did a video, interview on Doggy TV or something like that. And he was saying kind of Nas stifled him a little bit on some business shit. You know what I'm saying? So, but anyway, Ali Vegas was a very dope MC.
Well, real quick.
You got a thought on that? Go ahead.
I got a story. Like this ain't Kill podcast, so we can go ahead with the story. But I interviewed Ali Vegas back then. When was that album released or that soundtrack?
This is 1999.
1999. Yep. I was doing a hip hop show. They came to B-More, him and Panama P.I. I think that was his name. Y'all remember him? He was on the Cannabis soundtrack Cannabis album doing a hook on one of the records. But they came through for an interview. And I remember doing the interview, and I mean, y'all know my affiliation with Queensbridge and Nas and that well and all that good stuff. But I didn't harbor no feelings or anything like that towards the kid or whatever. And I remember DJ Absolute was with him. And I remember, we was doing an interview. It was cool. I respect Shorty's skills. And I remember he was like, oh, your name Vegas too? And I was like, yeah. It's like, yo, we should probably battle. He didn't say this. Panama P.I. said that. We should probably battle. Now, they didn't know I rap. They just thought I was a radio host. But there was a sense, and this is back then when this was out, that in hip hop and what I got from them, just hearing them talk, on air and amongst each other was the fact that, like you said, yeah, he might have mentioned Nas stifling him on some business, but I think it had more to do with the fact that he kind of looked the part, kind of sound the part, and Nas wasn't really trying to be supplanted by a new version of himself. You know what I'm saying?
And that's kind of what he said in the interview.
Yeah, exactly. And I could see how he never really got to. And then also, you got to understand the fans too. Like if Illmatic is this and It Was Written came out and all that, all these records are like hip hop, magic to people. They're not going to take somebody who's new, who sounds like him, who's not him. I mean, he can't help what his voice sounds like, but at the end of the day, I could see how it stifled him, man. But yeah, Into Deep soundtrack definitely.
Yeah, man.
On.
Also, man, just real quick about the soundtrack, it was very Queens inspired, obviously with Nas, Nature, Mobb Deep, with Where Your Heart At on here, and the Quiet Storm remix on here, and 50 Cent having 2 songs on here, a track called Dreaming by Jill Scott. This is a very, very dope soundtrack and a very, very dope movie as well, man. I mean, very dope. You know what I'm saying? I just thought I'd say that because we were talking about how soundtracks introduce people. You know what I'm saying? That soundtrack kind of introduced 50 Cent to the masses outside of New York because, of course, during that time, he was doing mixtapes, but this was more on a national scale. So, again, to your point, man, soundtracks can make an artist, man. Soundtracks can take you, to another level, man, and also get where other stars want to do features with you and stuff like that, man. So, it's a big deal.
Yeah, another soundtrack that to me was a dope soundtrack for the time, but a whack movie in my opinion was New Jersey Drive. I felt.
Oh, you're talking about this right here?
And look, that's the other element we forgot. Some soundtracks had more than one value.
That's right.
New
Jersey Drive, Volume 1.
Volume 1. Now, what was on there? I can't remember them.
Oh man, Ill and Out Scratch, man, Red Man, Where Am I? Joint called Jersey by Queen Latifah, East Left, Keith Murray. Oh yeah, Benz or Beamer by Outkast is on here.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? Can't you see Total and B.I.G. man? Yeah, man, it's a couple of Coolio on here. There's a couple of Heavy D, MC8. It's a couple of Laws of Underground. So yeah, it's a couple of joints on here, man. Like also, I think that would be volume 2 of New Jersey Drive soundtrack was one of my favorite J. Rue Damage songs called Invasion. End up being on Wrath of the Math, and yeah, another thing too for listeners, these soundtracks were on major labels, and this is on Tommy Boy Records right here. New Jersey Drive was on Tommy Boy Records, and of course, Sony Music was the Into Deep. Also, Vague, we spoke about. I think we're talking about Street Fighter movie. This is the soundtrack right here.
Yeah,
has one of my favorite Nas and Large Professor collabos called One on One. If you guys like Nas and haven't heard a track called One on One, it's here on the Street Fighter soundtrack. Right here, there's a couple of hip hop joints on here. Ice Cube is on here. The Far Side, LL Cool J, Craig Mack. Oh yeah, quite a few people on here, man. There's quite a few dope joints on this joint as well, man. Yeah.
And then on the Street Fighter soundtrack, that's
absolutely
the key. That's the thing people got to realize, man. It was like Tone said in the beginning, the soundtracks sometimes was more successful than the film, and they were loaded because it was like you were getting this all-star roster of singers and rappers, and they weren't making whack records. You know what I'm saying? And if the movie was good, then it was even better. You know what I'm saying? So they were just selling like crazy. Now, unfortunately, somewhere along the lines that changed. And Tone, I know there's someone out there who's probably younger who says to themselves, yeah, well, what about that new Superfly soundtrack that Future did? I get it. I don't think it's the same because I think the difference is so that people really get it when we start to think about whether or not those types of soundtracks exist today is people talked about the soundtrack just as much as the movie. Like if a movie came out and we, I mean, we black, so we can really only talk from black people perspective, but you might go to your aunt house and she rocking the soundtrack the entire weekend. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And it just feels like this movie came out, is all everybody's talking about. Everybody has a soundtrack. Everybody's playing these songs. It feels like a entire experience. Again, like I said about the Black Panther soundtrack. The movie, even though I wasn't a big fan of the soundtrack itself, it had a couple of joints I did like. I think the movie made it even better because I love the movie, so I love the scenes that feature some of the songs. And Tone, when you think about today and maybe a couple years back or whatever, does it really exist? Because yeah, I could say the Black Panther soundtrack might be one of them, but then when I think about it, like nobody, even though these soundtracks feature a lot of hip hop, which is strange, nobody's really clamoring for the Game of Thrones soundtrack as much as the show. A lot of people don't know those Game of Thrones soundtracks are predominantly hip hop, but nobody cares. So, Tone, do you know what happened? Will it ever come back?
I don't know. It's strange because the connection is gone, and like you said, for us, it was a big deal because to get a soundtrack because it brought you closer to the movie and it brought you closer to the actors in the movie. You remember certain songs that were played during certain scenes in the movie, and that was a big deal. And sometimes you would watch the movie like, well, that song is dope. Let me go back to the soundtrack so I can rock that in the car, stuff like that. So it was an experience. You know what I'm saying? So I know I did that. If I'm watching Menace to Society and I hear that Spice One, I need to go put that Spice One on in the car.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So I can blast it. You know what I'm saying? I got my hoopty back in '93. You know what I'm saying? I'm rocking that straight up Menace. And again, I'm thinking about when the movie was going off and I'm hearing MC8 and I saw him in the movie. I'm riding, listening to it. And to me, I'm part of the experience.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So no, the hip hop fans of today, I don't think they embrace any of the movies that came out in the 2000s as far as like the soundtracks like that because this is the social media era. If there was any big soundtracks out right now that people was loving the tracks on there and it was recommended, we would see it on our timelines. Yeah, Facebook, IG, Twitter. Where are the hip hop soundtracks at now for the movies? What are the songs right now that stand out in 2019 off a movie? Because in 1996 or something like that, let's say High School High was out. Well, Lil' Kim had Queen Bitch.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So he's like, oh, okay. Like I said, In Too Deep, they had, you had the Mob Deep joint in the club. You know what I'm saying? So now what's the joints that's connecting people to the movie via the soundtrack? What's the songs? We don't know the big soundtrack songs because the Black Panther joint you're talking about was more of a full album experience kind of thing. But what's the song people playing right now still from that? Because I still play Pain from Above the Rim in 2019. It came out in 1994. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Will any hip-hop fans, let's say in the early 20s right now, be playing any songs from any soundtrack movies hip-hop inspired in 15, 20 years from now? We're playing songs, babe. The joints we talking about, you and I both still listen to these songs. They came out 25 years ago.
Yeah. And I think, unfortunately, it speaks to the talent pool that exists today, because what was being created before was these artists were making records for the soundtracks. In a lot of cases, these songs didn't appear on their albums. You had to get.
And we were mad about that.
And we were mad about that.
We was like, man, why ain't Pain on Milk Is the Work?
Yeah, exactly. Especially Tupac. Especially Tupac. He had a lot.
Why is My Block not on it? Yeah, man.
He had a lot of records that didn't appear on albums, but they were so good that, you know, the dope part about it is, like you said, with listening for that long, is the song individually is already dope. It doesn't need a movie. It doesn't need to be attached to a soundtrack with a theme and all of that. But then you put it back in with the rest of the dope records on the soundtrack, and it's a dope soundtrack. Then if you have a dope movie at the same time, then you put it in with that. That's why it felt like back then it was so much of a force when a good movie with a good soundtrack would come out, because it swallowed everything. Like, you know, you could be in somebody's house and they have the soundtrack and they ain't even see the damn movie yet. You know what I'm saying? They just love the music.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And vice versa. Some people see the movie, love the movie, didn't even know the soundtrack was that crazy. But you don't see that, I think, mainly because even if we don't individually like some of the records, the hits that some of the younger rappers have or some of the singers have, they just never appear on movie soundtracks. You know what I'm saying? They usually, if they're featured on a movie soundtrack, it's throwaway records. You know what I'm saying? And then nobody really cares. So it's strange. Like, you got,
you know what, too, though?
Crazy.
You know what I think too, also, exposure was different back then. So an artist and the label might say, well, we want this particular artist to really get some exposure. This movie's gonna be pretty big, the soundtrack might be big. You know, I'm sure that there were artists and record labels vying to get a spot on the soundtrack. I think it was a big deal, looked at it as a big deal and accomplishment if you get on the soundtrack, because you're being heard more. That's still part of your marketing. I'm on 2 or 3 soundtracks, man. I'm popping. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Nowadays, maybe some of these artists might be, let's just say, for example, Rick Ross. He might be like, well, I don't really care to be on the new so-and-so soundtrack. I don't care. I can just release my joint on IG or, you know, YouTube or something like that. Back then, artists might say, hey, man, my album coming out in like 3 months, but if I can get this dope single right here on this movie soundtrack, you know, I already got a buzz right now. You know what I'm saying? Because back then it was all magazines and Rap City. You know what I'm saying? That was really, now you got 25,000 outlets to be known, to be heard. So I think that the focus has been taken away from you know, big artists. Because back then, like you said, big artists got on soundtracks all the time back then.
Yeah. And I think like, you know, I think it's spotty at the most. Like, cause you can say American Gangster, you know what I'm saying? The Jay-Z version and the soundtrack itself was actually good, but well, I guess what people don't get is we were getting this all of the time back in the 90s. It was like
every year,
man, every summer, almost, you know, every movie that would drop, it was almost mandatory to see who's on the soundtrack and what it sounds like. But it's crazy. Now, to end this off, Tone, are there any soundtracks from the 90s that we haven't mentioned that we probably should, just to give some highlights as far as, you know, dope soundtracks?
Well, of course, 1994 Murder Was the Case. You know what I'm saying? Of course, West Coast. So you got a bunch of dope joints from Snoop and the Dog Pound, and my dude Sam Snead. You better recognize, yo, man, that was one of my favorite West Coast joints. Also, another dope soundtrack is Slam soundtrack.
Slam, yeah.
Very dope. It's a tape. Of course, I got people. I still have my tapes. I didn't throw them away, man. Dope cast on here, man. Black Rob, Busta Rhymes, Noriega, Mobb Deep, ODB, Compton's Most Wanted, Flipmode Squad, KRS-One, Q-Tip, Grand Nubians, Big Pun, Goody Mob, Capadonna, Dead Prez, man. Slam soundtrack is another one, very dope. The movie's pretty dope too, but the soundtrack is definitely worth any listeners who haven't heard it, give that a shot. Billy soundtrack, very dope.
That's right,
my joint $500,000 on there. Some niggas, that's my joint.
Another one, Streets Is Watching soundtrack. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Then you started getting in like the little hip hop mini movies, like Bout It. You know what I'm saying? You started getting things like that. just a very dope time, man. Like, I guess the best way to close this out, Tone just read the roster for the movie Slam, right? That roster was just people from everywhere. That's what we're talking about. You getting talent from everywhere. A Black Panther soundtrack, you know, the points. You got talent from everywhere on that record. And I think that's kind of what was missing. And who knows what happened? It could be business. It could be the fact that, you know, maybe it just wasn't as lucrative as it used to be. I know that there was some point where there was just too many whack movies and too many soundtracks trying to be dope that were big budget that just didn't fit, like Bullworth and stuff like that. So it's interesting. It's a dope time in hip hop to remember the 1990s black movies and hip hop and R&B soundtracks. Just a dope time. Go listen to all of that, man. But now we go and leave your comments in the comment section below. There's a soundtrack that we didn't mention. Please leave it below because, you know what I'm saying, we can go get it digitally, check it out again, whatever it may be. But we get to the point in the show where we like to recommend to you, amongst all the other stuff we recommend, a album or mixtape you should definitely go back and check out. And for me, Tone, it's 50 Cent's original debut album, Power of a Dollar. And this is when he was on Sony, Columbia Records. This was before 50 got shot and he talked the way he talks now. A number of dope records on here. For instance, Power of the Dollar was dope. The Good Die Young, Corner Bodega, That Ain't Gangsta, I'm a Hustler, How to Rob, You Ain't Gangsta, Round Here, Your Life's on the Line, and Ghetto Quran, which some people feel like is the record that got him shot. But one of the dopest hip hop records of all time. Also, Thug Love is on here, which was a single featuring Beyonce. If you didn't know that, 50 Cent did the record with Beyonce way back then. But yeah, it was supposed to drop in like 1999, 2000, but didn't. 50 Cent got shot. And the label kind of got spooked, shelved his album, eventually dropped 50 Cent. 50 Cent hit the mixtape circuit with G Unit, Shady Records. Eminem gets a mixtape, hears him, signs him, the rest is history. But before Get Rich or Die Trying, there was The Power of a Dollar, and 50 had a buzz. How to Rob gave him a bigger buzz because people were like, yo, he's really making a record of talking about robbing all these rappers. But it was who he was, man, and he was dope, and you know, he was lyrical, and this was the time where 50 didn't really know what his identity was, because there are a majority of records there where he sound like the 50 you know, but then there's some records there where he sound exactly like Jay-Z, especially from the Jay-Z from the 90s, the late 90s. And that was one of the reasons why I didn't want to play that particular record, because I'm like, he sounds like Jay-Z, till I heard How to Rob. But definitely you should check it out, man. It was finally released, I believe, in like 2003 or something like that. And it was released in its entirety, which is also a reason for you to get it, because typically when an album is shelved, sometimes people don't want to clear samples, or they want to keep, you know, if Ghetto Quran got him shot, they want to keep it off. No, it's there in its entirety on iTunes and all of that. So 50 Cent, Power of a Dollar. Tone, when you first heard this, what were your thoughts, you know what I'm saying, on 50 Cent and the whole situation, and what's your recommendation for this week?
Oh yeah, man, when I first heard Power of the Dollar, I was like, man, this dude nice. Straight up, I was just like, dude, nice. Then I started hearing the mixtapes joint. Then, like I showed you guys, the In Too Deep joint with the rowdy, very, very witty, man. And I love maybe the good die young, man. That's a real dope song, and man. And, you know, a lot of people who got on the 50 Cent after Getting Rich and the more famous 50 Cent now, you might sleep on the fact that 50 was a spitter.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? When 50 Cent first came out, 50 Cent could rap. You know what I'm saying? That's why Nas took him on tour with him with the Bravehearts and all that on the Nostradamus tour. You know what I'm saying? He was running around with Nas at the time. You know what I'm saying? And he did a couple of joints with Nas, Too Hot, I believe, and like 2 or 3 other tracks. And dude can spit. You know what I'm saying? I thought it was a dope album. I thought it would have been a dope debut. Of course, again, ended up getting shelved and it ended up getting released and leaked and all that stuff at some point. But yeah, man, very dope. Ghetto Quran, still one of my favorite 50 Cent songs. I still listen to it to this day. You know what I'm saying? This is a very dope project, man. My recommendation, speaking of Nas, is Godson 2002 album. When you following that Jay-Z battle with Blueprint and Stillmatic and Take Over Ether and the other 1,000 songs they did against each other that a lot of California fans don't realize, Nas was kind of simmering down. His mom had passed away. She had gotten sick and passed away, and so he went a different route with Godson, where he wasn't as aggressive as far as this. And what he did was he did I Can for the Kids. He did Made You Look. It was a street banger. You know what I'm saying? And he was still kind of throwing shots, but he didn't name Jay or anyone else, but he was throwing shots in his own way that Nas throws shots. And he decided to, what was impressive was he decided to address everything on The Last Real Nigga Alive. Yeah. He told his whole story coming up, robbing in Queensbridge, all the way up to, hanging with Big and Puff, and when Jay was kind of checking him and rating him style and all of this stuff like that. And he kind of sunned Jay at the end of the song, like, I was Scarface, Jay was Manolo. He said it hurt me when I had to kill him in his whole squad for Dolo. You know what I'm saying? So that's the kind of way he did it, man. And then he had the joint Heaven Was a Mile Away. He had the song One More Dance, about dancing with his mom one more time, man, in heaven or what have you. You know what I'm saying? So he had the joint with Alicia Keys, man. He just did a great job of putting together a very solid album. Get Down was the dope intro to the album. You had a little James Brown, I believe, sample in that. So, kind of make you, like some Eric Sermon type flavor. You know what I'm saying? But just a dope album, man. Godson, man. Platinum album for Nas again, a number 1 on the charts again. And I thought it was just kind of dope the way he dissed everyone without really going as hard. It's like I won already, so that is the victory lap. I think Godson was the victory lap of the Jay-Z battle. He didn't feel the need to go as hard as Jay did on Blueprint 2. But yeah, man, one of my probably top 5 Nas albums overall, man. I thought it was a dope album, man. So what did you think about Godson, man?
I felt the same way, man. I felt like, Stillmatic was like this huge comeback, and everybody was wilding over different songs on that album, and it just had a real big energy to it. And he was everywhere. He was back. You know what I'm saying? It was a comeback. And Godson, like you said, it felt like Stillmatic felt like Fight Night. Godson felt like the day after you unify the championships. You know what I'm saying? After you unify the belts, it was like Tone said, man. It was a more calmer tone, and it was more about the lyricism and planting your flag as as an MC. Like records like wasn't like Book of Rhymes on there.
Yes, Book of Rhymes, the Alchemist did that, I believe.
Yeah, like joints like that. Just creative, just hip hop, you know what I'm saying? And as far as like the production also started to like mirror more of a old school sound, you know what I'm saying? Like work with Salam Remy to kind of repurpose some break beats and some more familiar like old school beats and samples. And I think it's a dope album, man. That sometimes gets forgotten. So I'm with you, Tone, man. It's definitely one to go back to. I think when it comes to Nas's catalog, a lot of people like to rush to Illmatic, to It Was Written, and rush straight to like Life Is Good sometimes.
Yep.
and forget about records like Godson. A lot of people loved that album when it came out. So it's a perfect recommendation, man. Go check that out. Nas's Godson and also 50 Cent, Power of the Dollar. Leave your comments in the comment section below about anything we mentioned today. And if you like this show, hit the like button. If you really love it, hit the subscribe button. But most importantly, share with people you know enjoy this kind of content. Please know that this podcast is not only available here on YouTube in video form, but also in audio form via my stream of my podcast, Hip Hop Now Podcast, which is available wherever you listen to podcasts. And also you can visit intothedome.com, where not only do you have the videos and the audio, but you have a number of dope, in-depth articles written by the homie Tone that will enlighten you about music and some of these artists even more. So go and do that. And more importantly, go out and support real hip hop. Peace.
Peace.
Drop it on the random.